You don't have to be, because
Mhm.
if you understand that the father archetype is within you and you can tap into it, then you have the source within you individually and independent of the external father, which means you can create a relationship with this internal archetype directly through intuition, through dreams, through peak experiences.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Jung on Purpose. I'm Debra Maldonado.
And I'm Dr. Rob. And today we're continuing our series on purpose, and of course, from a Jungian perspective. But today we have a special one because we're talking about the father archetype and how your personal relationship with your father plays into how you approach your purpose and whether you find it or not. So it's a juicy topic, and we appreciate you tuning in.
Yes. And before we get started, I do want to remind you, if you're watching us on YouTube, click the button in the corner and subscribe to our channel. If you are listening to us on one of those podcast services, don't forget to subscribe, enroll for to get every episode and make sure you're getting those notifications so you don't miss an episode. And also it does us a favor, helps us get more listeners and more people having access to this information. So let's talk about today is the father archetype, the father, and its impact on living our purpose.
Yeah, so let's start with purpose. Let's define it so that we have a baseline from which to approach this wonderful topic. So, purpose is a deep inner sense that your life has meaning and direction beyond personal goals, outside of expectations. Now, this is important. It's outside of your kind of those personal goals that you have for yourself, your career, your profession, because a lot of people mistake purpose for profession. And
Mm.
there is a connection, of course, and we'll talk about that. But purpose is really something internal.
Can you read that again? Because that was so powerful.
So purpose is a deep inner sense that your life has meaning and direction beyond personal goals or outside expectations.
That is so brilliant.
Yeah, because that is a good definition to hold on to when you think about your purpose in life. It's not your career, it's not a certain job or profession, it's something deeper.
And
So,
so when we talk about what purpose is, many
um,
people confuse it to be a career choice or a service they're doing for others. Like my purpose is to help others, or I suffered from this and my purpose to help others who suffered from that. And that could be included in your purpose, but the true purpose really isn't reliant on other people. It's really that sense of you feel that sense of meaningless because there's a lot of people that like to help others and the ego gets all attached to I am the great healer, I'm the great guru and the all-knower teacher. And it's not really a purpose if the ego is depending on the outside for acknowledgement and approval and praise even for it. And we all get caught up in it. We're human beings. We all want to be people to be grateful for what we do for them. But then it's that slippery slope where we get so attached. And then it takes away the magic and the meaning of the purpose because feel like we're over functioning to make sure everyone's happy in our purpose career, such as coaches and therapists and massage therapists, people that especially do work that help others, nonprofits. I could see that where it becomes exhausting and then you feel like you need a break and then it loses the intention that you originally had and it clouds it with all the ego stuff. So
absolutely.
when we think about our father, how is that related to us choosing or identifying what our purpose is?
Yeah, so let's start with the biographical father, as sometimes it's called, meaning the person that was a parent to you, or different people, right? Because for me, for example, my grandfather played a big role in a father
Mm,
figure for
mhm.
me. And so when I think about fathers, I often think of him as well as my biographical father, the person that gave birth to me or, played a
He gave
part in
birth?
that.
Wow. Your culture is very unique.
Yeah.
He gave you the seed.
Yeah, I mean, whether we like it or not, we carry 50% of our
Yeah.
father's genes, which
Mhm.
means we're flesh of his flesh, bones of his
Yeah.
bones, right? All that kind of stuff.
So innately, we automatically have that father has an impact on us genetically. Both the
Absolutely.
parents have impact us on genetically.
Yeah, and from the Jungian perspective, that means we inherit a lot of, well, 50% of the archetypes from the father directly, meaning that lineage of father. I love this. Some of the genetics, the way they think about it is, if you think about your father's father and his father, and just kind of go down that Y chromosome lineage back to ancient times, right? You kind of get a sense of that direct line of where you come from. Anyway,
And so when
so
you say archetypal father, just so people understand the archetypes, is that we're passing down the idea of father and what a father should be from
mhm,
generation to generation.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are cultural definitions as well, that
Mhm.
we're born into a certain culture. We use a certain language, a certain religious or lack of rejection of religious systems that still plays a role in the cultural context that we're born into. So there's a lot of influences going on, but here we want to look at purpose in particular for the individual, for you, and the role that the father plays in that. Now, we're going to look both at the personal father, or the biographical father, as we may call it, and the archetypal father. So hang on, right? And we'll try to
And
define these as much as possible.
well, I'd like to start just before we go into the personal is that yes, we get all that genetic material, the assumptions and archetypal images of what a father should be. And then we also have the universal archetype of the father that's by all mankind, of all the fathers that ever lived. And then also this powerful archetype is not personal. It's like kind of a thing of its own. And so when we're born, we project that father archetype, all that information from generations and cultures, and not only our generations, but humanity, onto this father, this little
Mm.
human person that is carries like we have these assumptions that we expect from our human father. And so that sets us up for this kind of challenging relationship with our earthly father, whether they were great or not, because of that projection.
Yes, that's the bigger picture. But let's
Mhm,
begin with the simple structure of the family, right?
mhm.
Family unit. So you have a mother, obviously, and you have a father. Um, Whether that father again is your biological father or your stepfather or somebody like an uncle or or a grandparent, grandfather, it doesn't matter. The Because we have that archetype of father, whoever takes care of us in that regard, as far as giving us rules, structure, protection, sense of order, that's our father figure.
A
So
sense of
young,
power too, right?
yeah, sense of power. So let's think in terms of that biographical father in relationship to agency. In other words, you're going to get a sense of your personal power from your relationship with your father and what you observe and kind of how you interpret that relationship that you have with your father. What kind of rules, what kind of discipline do you receive or lack of, right? All that goes into your sense of agency. Now, agency, it's kind of a strange word, but all it means is your will, your sense of I can do things in the world. In some psychologies, this is called sense of efficacy. In other words, you feel like, yeah, I can do things for myself. I can go out into the world and build something, make something of myself. So that's really an important piece, of course, because we're talking about purpose. If you don't have that sense of efficacy, easy for me to say, or that strong will, right, or that strong ego, like Jung might say, then you're not able to build a life for yourself. You always doubt yourself. Now, this has a lot to do with whether your biographical father has found and is living his purpose or not.
And so when we see, let's say, well, let's talk about first our relationship with the father and regardless of the purpose idea. So your relationship with your father is basically symbolic of that father archetype we talked about, but also a symbolic of your relationship with your own power, your own will. So a supportive father, an encouraging father, you will tend to feel most likely, and there's always exceptions to the rules, feel this sense of I can do it. I can accomplish things. I like almost like you borrow your father's faith in you to do the things you want. Obviously, not everyone had that supportive father, especially our generation. The father was pretty much not really in many families, not in charge of raising the children, so they were kind of working a lot. But then other times the father could be very critical and very demanding or controlling of the child. And then what the child is receiving about their own power is that I can't be trusted with my power. I don't trust my own judgments. I don't know how to take action, or being even overly dependent on the father to guide you. So it's that there's a lot of layers to it, but it's really thinking about the father as, does he give us permission to have faith in ourselves and the world, or did he say give us a sense of mistrust in ourselves and doubt that we have the ability? And it's such a deep impression that happens early on, and then sometimes we forget about it. And then when it comes to living our purpose, when we're at that midlife or the potential years, when we're looking for meaning, it's like, do we have the courage to make a change? And that comes back to that early life. Do I have agency in my life, or do I feel like I have to depend on my paycheck or depend on someone else, or not take a risk because I don't trust myself, or to even choose a different path? And so all that comes down to how that relation with the father was, and it's that layer of experience.
Absolutely. That whole psychology, of course, of family systems and
Mm,
relationship with parents is fascinating. And really, we don't know that much about it. I mean, there are some good models for working in coaching and in therapy, but there's still sketchy. There's still kind of very subjective, and we have to go on an individual basis. But in general, right, what we're talking about is kind of this transmission of purpose. Is there a sense of agency? Is there a sense of you're here to do something important with your
mm,
life? And often, if that is not there, right, if the father doesn't have it in his own life, it's difficult to communicate that to the
mm.
child because even if they say it, they're not doing it themselves.
Like, do what you love, but he's complaining about his boss and his same company for 20 years, which
Yeah,
is very rare. But also too, I'd love to talk a little bit about projection and the perception of criticism. It really comes down to your father might not have been very critical, but there was a perception that they were criticizing you. So that's just as real as if they were. And so when we think about our parents, we only see like a sliver of who they are, and then we make judgments and assumptions of what they feel about us, how much faith they have in us, and then we never, we make these assumptions and build our life on those assumptions when the parent could not have that. We have, a father who's like wants the best for their child. The child may feel like my father's always criticizing me. I'm never enough. And so I had a few clients that were men, and especially for men, this really affects the men because they look to the father as like a model for them, where
yeah,
women look for the mother, you typically, but there again, exceptions to every rule. But a lot of the men that I work with, have worked with in the past, their father that have been critical, they tend to not want to succeed because they want to hang on to the bitterness.
mm,
And like we would get to that point, like why aren't you're trying to make change in your life, you're trying to move forward, but they sabotage it all the time. And I'm like, well, what would be the downside of you really being successful? And they'd always say, then my father wouldn't have been such a bad person. And so we have this like complex relationship because if you have resentment for your father, and then you won't succeed, so you could hang on to that resentment. And it's like, if I
mm.
do succeed, then I have to let it go. And it's such a weird, irrational thing to do, but that's how we build our life. So the father, especially for men, can be very impactful on that sense of the ability to see. And I think the projection is so, so powerful that we believe things about our parents that aren't actually true until we ask them and we confront them. And then they're like, no, I never thought that. And you're like, you live your whole life thinking they believe something that wasn't true.
Yeah, and of course this gets at the cultural piece that in our culture there's this idea that our parents screwed us up. Now, we're not saying they don't have an impact. Like, we're acknowledging that there's a powerful connection between agency or sense of purpose and the relationship with the Father. But there's more to it, as we'll see. People get stuck on this idea that because the culture affirms that if your parents screwed you up, you're going to be screwed up for the rest of your life, and you're going to need therapy, and you're going to be a failure or not find that sense of purpose in your life, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Mm.
because that's the way consciousness works. Whatever we believe to be true comes our truth,
Mhm.
our reality. It's like we're creating our own narrative. And so it's an important piece to understand that we can look at our family history and our relationship with our fathers in relationship to purpose, but that we can also transcend it. And so that's where the archetype comes in, because it leads us to this deeper understanding of where does the relationship with the father come in, and what is the deeper psychology of that. So
Mm.
Jung talks about an archetype, a father archetype, that predates our relationship with our father. In other words, we're born with it. It's an innate process. So let's define the archetype first, and then we'll look at what does that mean for the father. So an archetype is a universal pattern or model of behavior and imagination that exists in every human mind. In other words, as soon as you're born, these archetypes are already there. Now, the father, if we have a father archetype, just like we have a mother archetype, what we're going to do is project it onto our parent, onto our biographical father or our grandfather or our
Would
own.
it be safe to say that all archetypes are unconscious and then the world is like the symbolic representation of our internal world in these different archetypes, like the mother, the king, the hero, all that? Yeah.
That's right. That was Jung's view, right? That we are symbolic creatures and we experience the world in this
Mm.
symbolic way. When we're unconscious, we believe the world to be outside, external, independent of our mind. And that is an illusion. It cannot be independent of our mind because the way we perceive the world is through the mind.
Mm.
And so what we're doing is we're participating in our own life
Mm.
through perception, just merely perception. So now think of becoming conscious of that. And that's what the aim of purpose is to realize that you are the creator of your life. Because if you think of purpose as coming from the outside, then you get fooled into that idea that profession or work is somehow your purpose. That whatever you end up doing, that is somehow your purpose. There's something to that, of course. We want to address that. But purpose has to come from within. You have to understand that there's a calling from within, what people might call the soul or the spirit or the self, like Jung says, that is guiding you from the inside. And if you
So it's
listen
your
to it,
spiritual guide, the father archetype.
that's right. That's right. So,
And so instead of using your father as a guide to tell you about power in the world, about purpose in the world, about vocation, about your will, your
mhm.
agency, you can now in midlife, you could start shifting the taking back the projection and moving inward and finding your own sense of power. And like I said, you could spend the rest of your life blaming your father for the things you don't have in your life. And like, I believe me, I've done plenty of that. And it just kept me stuck. I was like in a spinning soup of
Yeah.
just rearranging the furniture and finding another way to like work on that angle of my relation with my father. And it was just not getting me anywhere. And the father archetype helps us transcend the personal and really tap into, because we're not a personal being. We're a universal being. And so
Yeah.
it really gets in touch with who we really are.
Yeah, it's a great alternative to the idea that if my parents screwed me up, I'm doomed.
Mhm.
You don't have to be, because
Mm.
if you understand that the father archetype is within you and you can tap into it, then you have the source within you individually and independent of the external father, which means you can create a relationship with this internal archetype directly through intuition, through dreams, through peak experiences like people talk about psychedelics or just spiritual experiences that connect you to that inner spirit within
So
you.
how does that guide how can someone access that guide to live their purpose? That's the question.
Yeah, so it is a journey.
It's not like, "Oh, here's my our Father Archetype. I'm done. Let me hang out with him, and I don't need to do any other work on myself."
Yeah. Yeah. Because if we think about how life evolves, we first build this persona, this ego, as Jung says, and we over identify with it. We start to think, this is who I am. That's why the profession becomes so important, and we think that is our purpose. If
Mm,
I'm a doctor, I think, well, that's how I help people, and therefore that is my purpose. Yes, it's an expression, or it can be an expression of purpose, but the purpose has to be rooted in that self. In other words, in the relationship that you have with the Father archetype within. So what is that? In religion, we see it as the spiritual father, the sky
mm.
god who, kind of intercedes on your behalf, protects you, guides you in life, and gives you that mana personality that we talked about in one of our podcasts. It gives you that spiritual power in life, but it's coming from beyond the ego self, beyond the individual personality.
So just like when we're younger, we project the Father, that we project everything outward, and we project the power onto and our source of power based on that relationship and our lack of power based on that. So when we think about purpose, it really isn't what you do, because you could do anything for your purpose, but it's how you do it. And so you can be a doctor and save millions of lives, but you can do it from a place where you're dependent on everyone telling you what a great doctor you are, needing rewards, feeling almost like you need to keep like having, being recognized in the industry and, driving yourself, working really hard, a feeling if you're working harder, you're all these lives to save, which is a beautiful thing, but then it doesn't really feel meaningful in the way that if you know that you are the source of, that the source of power is within you and it's not your character that's actually acting out as the doctor. It's the power within you that's flowing through you that's giving you the power. You don't need anyone else to tell you you're a great doctor. You don't need the people to acknowledge you and thank you for your service. It comes from a place of, and I think actually this is where you can truly be the best is because you're not using just your ego to create from. You're actually tapping into your spiritual power where you're divinely guided to do the work you need to do. And you're not in that fear or grasping for attention. Just like the projection of the Father, you take that power back. You can project that into your career, your father outside into your career. So it's really an internal sense of the source of meaning comes from within, not through what you do. What you do is how you express it versus how you get it. So I think that would be a better way to think about it. Like the job
Yeah,
doesn't give you your purpose gives you the job in a way, right? Your
that's
true
right.
purpose.
Yeah, the true purpose is an important piece of individuation, because then what it allows you to do is be motivated from that higher purpose. Is,
Mhm.
like you said, the divine inspiration, or if you're an atheist, you can think about the collective unconscious guiding you from within psychologically, so that you don't have to believe anything in the spiritual realm, but understand it as this is part of life, right? To transcend my limited ego self and find something that is a much larger calling and gives purpose and meaning to my life.
And we
That
could say you can find like your meaningful work is important because you want to spend your life doing it. You don't want to have, just do it on the weekends and have a job and I'm going to live my purpose only on the weekend. So if you can find a profession that brings you income that has meaning and purpose, that's the best because then you get to do it all the time. And it's not like something like a hobby for you. I'm going to do my purpose on the weekend or in the evenings when I have time.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a simplified way of talking about it, but it gets the main points across, right?
Hmm.
That yes, we have a biographical father that we need to, in other words, we don't need to live from that point of view merely, or solely from that point of view. That if my father was absent, or my father was an alcoholic and they messed me up, that I'm doomed to live through that for the rest of my life, that there's an alternative to that. And that alternative comes through understanding the archetype, the father archetype that is inherited in us. In other words, you're born with it. You don't have to acquire it. You don't have to do anything special to receive it. All you have to do is tune in, do that inner journey of inner work, as we call it, of individuation that connects you to it. And you find the inspiration from within. So whatever you didn't receive from your biographical father, you can receive now from that internal father archetype, which
And
is
you
that.
do need to do shadow work first, around that, all those projections, your own assumptions of what that relationship was, the agreements you made with yourself,
Yeah.
the identity that you crafted, the persona that you crafted because of that relationship. And then as you peel back the layers of the falsehoods and the assumptions, you start to see that what's underneath is the ego, and its defenses are this beautiful spiritual power that's been kind of on the underneath pushing you. And it's almost like the part of us that feels unsettled in life. Like when we feel unsettled and we feel the meaning is missing, it's like almost like the father archetype is like, it's like a whisper or a push or like a compulsion to move toward, not a compulsion, but more be like a compelling to move you towards something more. It's like there's
Yeah.
something in me telling me I need to do something differently. And I don't know what that is, but it's just knowing that that discomfort is really a sign of growth and an invitation for growth.
Yeah.
And
And
I'd like to say one more thing about the father. If we've had a terrible father that, or like a father that wasn't optimal, most of us can find something wrong, is that maybe them being the way they were gave us the like almost like invitation for us to look deeper into life and the challenges that we had with our relationship with our father invited us to do the inner work that led you here or led you to explore that. And if they were the perfect ideal father, I wonder if we ever look inward. The difficulties in life are really there to help us look, turn inward. So it's almost like that idea that everything is useful.
absolutely. And I'd say, regardless of whether you had a great family life with your father or a great relationship or not, it's a good idea to do this inner work, especially after 30, 35, because you want to be free. In other words, you don't want to be beholden to the ideas and the conditioning that came from that biographical family situation, that personal narrative. There's nothing wrong with it. It was important at that time. But like Jung says, what was true in the morning of life is a lie in the second phase of the day, in the afternoon of life. So we have to reinvent ourselves and recreate ourselves. That's part of the human journey. That idea has been lost in modern times, but we see it still in mythology and in the stories that we tell. Now in the movies, right? In the hero's journey that we see in Star Wars or Harry Potter or whatever movies we're watching, the hero's journey story is still there. It's a metaphor for the internal journey that we have to undertake. That we have to conquer our own demons and reinvent ourselves, find our true purpose in life. And that only comes from that archetypal father that is within us.
I love that. I also to feel like we're all equal. Like we all have the potential, no matter what happened to you. Jung says that it's whatever happened to you doesn't matter. That you're free to create your life, and we're all free if we're willing to accept. And it's not like brush it aside what happened. You need to examine it, but you don't need to hang on to it forever. You need to like be able to know that there's another iteration of you ready to emerge. And no matter the darkness or the lightness you had early on, we all have that potential within us. Not one person is spared from that. So it's an invitation. All right. Well, great topic as usual, Rob. We will see you next week on Jung on Purpose. And again, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to see you here every week. And we'll be back with another great episode next week.
See you soon.
Take care.